James Mercer Langston Hughes was an American poet, social activist, novelist, playwright, and columnist from Joplin, Missouri. He moved to New York City as a young man, where he made his career. One of the earliest innovators of the then new literary art form called jazz poetry, Hughes is best known as a leader of the Harlem Renaissance. He famously wrote about the period that the Negro was in vogue, which was later paraphrased as when Harlem was in vogue. Growing up in a series of Midwestern towns, Hughes became a prolific writer at an early age. He graduated from high school in Cleveland, Ohio, and soon began studies at Columbia University in New York City. Although he dropped out, he gained notice from New York publishers, first in the Crisis magazine, and then from book publishers, and became known in the creative community in Harlem. He eventually graduated from Lincoln University. In addition to poetry, Hughes wrote plays and short stories. He also published several nonfiction works. From 1942 to 1962, as the civil rights movement was gaining traction, he wrote an in-depth weekly column in a leading black newspaper, the Chicago Defender. Like many African Americans, Hughes had a complex ancestry. Both of Hughes' paternal great-grandmothers were enslaved Africans, and both of his paternal great-grandfathers were white slave owners in Kentucky. According to Hughes, one of these men was Sam Clay, a Scottish-American whiskey distiller of Henry County, said to be a relative of statesman Henry Clay. The other was Silas Cushenberry, a Jewish-American slave trader of Clark County. Hughes's maternal grandmother Mary Patterson was of African-American, French, English, and Native American descent. One of the first women to attend Oberlin College, she married Lewis Sheridan Leary, also of mixed race, before her studies. Lewis Leary subsequently joined John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry in West Virginia in 1859, where he was fatally wounded. 10 years later, in 1869, the widow Mary Patterson Leary married again, into the elite, politically active Langston family. See the talented 10th, her second husband was Charles Henry Langston, of African American, Euro-American, and Native American ancestry. He and his younger brother John Mercer Langston worked for the abolitionist cause and helped lead the Ohio Anti-Slavery Society in 1858. After their marriage, Charles Langston moved with his family to Kansas, where he was active as an educator and activist for voting and rights for African Americans. His and Mary's daughter Caroline became a school teacher and married James Nathaniel Hughes. They had 2 children. The second was Langston Hughes, born in 1901 in Joplin, Missouri, first published in 1921 in the Crisis official magazine of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. The Negro Speaks of Rivers, which became Hughes's signature poem, was collected in his first book of poetry, The Weary Blues. Hughes's first and last published poems appeared in the Crisis. More of his poems were published in the Crisis than in any other journal. Hughes' life and work were enormously influential during the Harlem Renaissance of the 1920s, alongside those of his contemporaries, Zora Neale Hurston, Wallace Thurman, Claude McKay, Countee Cullen, Richard Bruce Nugent, and Aaron Douglas. Except for McKay, they worked together also to create the short-lived magazine Fire, devoted to younger Negro artists. Hughes and his fellows tried to depict the lowlife in their art, that is, the real lives of blacks in the lower social economic strata. They criticized the divisions and prejudices within the black community based on skin color. Hughes wrote what would be considered their manifesto, The Negro Artist and the Racial Mountain, published in The Nation in 1926. The younger Negro artists who create now intend to express our individual dark-skinned selves without fear or shame. If white people are pleased, we are glad. If they are not, it doesn't matter. We know we are beautiful. And ugly too. The tom-tom cries, and the tom-tom laughs. If colored people are pleased, we are glad. If they are not, their displeasure doesn't matter either. We build our temples for tomorrow, strong as we know how, and we stand on top of the mountain free within ourselves. He wrote novels, short stories, plays, poetry, operas, essays, and works for children. With the encouragement of his best friend and writer, Arnabon Tom, and patron and friend, Carl Van Vechten, he wrote 2 volumes of autobiography, The Big C and I Wonder as I Wander, as well as translating several works of literature into English. Hughes was drawn to communism as an alternative to a segregated America. Many of his lesser-known political writings have been collected in 2 volumes published by the University of Missouri Press and